I often start my sermons with a pop quiz. So usually I know that that's not people's favorite things. They're like, oh, I got out of high school. Why is this happening? But I have a quick question. How many psalms are there? 150. Right. What's the lectionary? Yes, it's a schedule of readings. It doesn't dictate, because we're Congregationalists, we do what we want, no one tells us what to do. It's kind of our MO. But it is, the Revised Common Lectionary is most mainline Protestants. We have a sort of rotation of readings that over 3 years we keep going through. So there's year A, year B, and year C. So quick math, how many weeks are there in a year? 52. So in theory, we could get through all of the Psalms without repeats, with like 6 weeks of repeats, right? Like we could use all of them. And yet, disproportionately, the ones that are edited out of the Revised Common Lectionary are the ones that we just heard today, like Psalm 22 and Psalm 6. Why might that be? They're sad. But are they negative? They're real. Yeah. So one of the things that gets levied against Christians an awful lot is that we're pretty hypocritical. Lots of us, especially who grew up in, I'll say, like a particular type of Christianity, fill in the blank with whatever your experience may have been, is that you go and you show up and you put on your best clothes and you pretend that everything is okay in your life, and then you go back home, and that's where you're able to collapse and sink into what is actually really going on. Church is not a place where we often have trusting relationships, where we let people know how bad it's actually gotten. Because if we tip our cards and we say, wait a second, you keep saying that I need to be experiencing all of this joy and I just don't, this is supposed to be a place of hope and I'm just not feeling it. If I say that and you don't agree with me, then I'm the weird one and I've lost my place in your regard. I've lost my place in this community because suddenly I'm out of step. It is a terrorism of happiness. And yet, it doesn't have to be that way. The Revised Common Lectionary, which I am usually a lectionary preacher, I really like the lectionary, but it is very specific about what slices of Scripture it picks and which ones it ignores. Because if we're progressive Christians, then we should have this hopeful, future-looking orientation to our faith. And yeah, like things are tough, and yeah, there's some problematic stuff in Scripture, but we're just going to not pay attention to that. Pay no attention to the trauma behind the curtain. But is that real? No. This year has walloped us as a community. The last 2 years, especially for the LGBTQ community here, has walloped Colorado Springs, and City Council just this last week has not made it any easier, with the member of City Council who represents this church's district saying some really terrible things about our trans siblings as we approach the 2-year anniversary of the Club Q shooting. They're trying to strip city funding from Pride, because why would we give that money to someone and not the parade of lights or the Pikes Peak or Bust rodeo? How dare we give resources to an under-resourced community in our city? And it got violent. The language got violent in City Council. And the day after, I got to gather with the Citizens Advisory Council, or the Community Advisory Council for the PRISM Community Collective, which is the resiliency center that has grown up out of the Club Q shooting, a queer services center for adults here for the first time in almost 10 years in Colorado Springs. And we spent a significant portion of that meeting lamenting, saying, it's really hard to be a queer person in Colorado Springs. It's really hard to be a black or brown person in Colorado Springs. There seems to be that everyone who holds the power is rallying against us. And how do we gather together to create a safe enough place where people can be real? We talked a little bit about how we spend some time weeping, like the psalmist, deeply needing to be witnessed by each other in a place where people get it, where we don't have to have a mask of bravery. We don't have to live into that tyranny of ever-flowing hopefulness when it just isn't there. This is a difficult time. In about 3.5 weeks, we're going to find out what the future of our country looks like. Is it nominally okay or really, really bad? Those are kind of our choices right now. It doesn't seem real hopeful for me and my friends. Does the genocide that we are funding still keep getting funded? Or do we still get the right to gather and to connect ourselves to each other and marry each other and care for each other and access to medical care for our queer kin? It is a terrible choice. There is not a lot of hopefulness. When neo-Nazis are marching through the streets of Denver literally yesterday, it sucks. I spend an awful lot of time with a tear-stained pillow, and I don't think I'm alone. That if we stop long enough to allow some of that grief in, there's a fear that it'll be overwhelming. That if we own it, it will own us. That there will be no end to it. And so we keep running. We keep pretending, we keep spiritually bypassing, we keep throwing the Psalms of Lament away because they remind us of our frailty. They remind us of how bad shit can actually get. They remind us that there does feel like a circle of people who are looking for our downfall. But buried in there, woven through, popping up just every so often, is a musical break. A word, Selah. It is a chance for the psalm to breathe, and it usually indicates a turning point in the psalm, a moment where we can gather ourselves and say, and yet, there is still some possibility. I come to church to remind myself that I'm not alone, that there are other people grieving the same things that I am grieving, that even though fear is overwhelming, it is not the end of the story, that we can light the Christ light for each other. When we can't find it for ourselves, we come back to remember what is possible, because grief can be profoundly alienating if we let it. But it can be profoundly connecting if we let it too. To say, I need you to see me, really see me. All of my hope and all of my fear and all of my angst and all of my anger and all of my grief and all of my rage, it is all here. And my joy is there too, but sometimes it's hard to find it. It's all this mixed up bag of everything it means to be human. So why do we edit out the most human psalms? There's a phrase, one of the oldest prayers in the Christian church. It's a Greek phrase, 2 words. Kyrie eleison. Does anyone know what it means? Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. And there's this funny thing that when it's translated, so that's a Greek phrase, but sometimes when the same phrase is translated into Hebrew and then translated back into English, it says, God, be gracious. Have mercy. Be gracious. Two sides of the same coin, but a little bit of a different entry into that same deep desire for connection to something larger than ourselves that says, I can't hold all this myself. Someone, please, be here with me in it. And that is the substance of the and yet. In Psalm 6, even though the writer is weeping on his pillow, it's a psalm of terminal illness, actually. That's the history behind it. Literally, when he says, my bones are melting, it is a physical experience because he is ill. And yet, the Holy One, the Most High, has heard my prayer. And yet, all of my enemies will be terrified. And yet, there is still a possibility of a future where me and mine are thriving. And yet, and yet, and yet. Selah. Kyrie eleison. There is mercy here for us. There is grace. There is love. There is still hope, even when hope feels hopeless. It's a counterintuitive thing to name our hopelessness out loud. There is this deep desire to hold it in a box, hold it at bay, say, we can't acknowledge what's in this closet of skeletons, what might pop out and scare us. It is spooky season after all. But every haunted house movie is actually a meditation on grief ignored. The ghosts in the house are the trauma that we don't talk about. There's a reason most of the dads are therapists. It's a trope, it really is. That we are not paying attention to the grief and loss in our own lives, and so it haunts us, it jump scares us, it comes out of nowhere, and it rules how we live, even if we think we're not giving it power. And then, when morning breaks and the mist clears, what usually has happened is that they faced down the scary thing, looked it in its face, and sometimes even offered it compassion, depending on the iteration of the trope. We're not able to do that if we don't acknowledge that it's there. This community, just our little gathering, has gone through a lot this year. Losses and health diagnoses and job transitions and more that maybe I don't even know about. There's so much that has changed about this year, so much grief because things are not as they were. I have a suspicion that more than just me have tear-stained pillows at night when we contemplate our own lives, our own losses, and especially when we think about our city, our state, our country, our world. We are watching devastation happen in real time with two of the largest hurricanes in human history in the last 2 weeks. How can we not be devastated, especially when we know that it is caused by corporations? That human-caused climate change created this ecosystem that we are now trying our best to steward, us people without that kind of power, responsible now for the destruction other people have wrought. It is overwhelming. We just crossed a year of ethnic cleansing in Gaza, where we have seen in real time cell phone footage of explosions and people dying, of children begging us to pay attention. How can we bear witness to that and not be devastated? It's a big burden for all of us to carry. Kyrie eleison. God, have mercy. It's a little bit like crying uncle. I'm out. I can't hold anymore. Not knocking out and tapping out in a wrestling match. I can't do this anymore. And yet, here I am, with people who are grieving just as much as I am. And I can't do it myself. But when we share our grief, it's cut in half. The thing that I've been trying so hard to keep behind closed doors, to just keep trucking through my life, to not name and own about how I'm living, if I can just lay it at your feet, lay it at God's feet and say, it is too much, have mercy. There, in the silence, in the breath, in the musical break, something can shift. Because the act of keeping it secret is one of the heaviest things. The act of trying to keep the skeletons in the closet, the act of trying to keep the ghosts at bay, that's the hard work of grieving, actually. Because if I hold it out to you, this tender, bleeding thing, my heart, your heart, I can trust that you will hold it with compassion, that God will help us all hold each other up, that there is something greater at work here than just the sum of all of our grief. That and yet comes when we name it for what it is. It hurts. It hurts. My bones feel like melting wax. Kyrie eleison, have mercy. A kind of funny modern Greek translation is, Sir, take it easy. Sir, take it easy. Please, can life just be a little bit more gentle on all of us? Can there be a little bit of mercy, a little bit of grace, a little bit of kindness? But you don't know to offer that to me if I don't tell you I need it. And so we move to care for one another, to bear each other's burdens, to break down the loneliness that these feelings can engender. And then church transforms, not into the most hypocritical place. That's a valid criticism, but a place where we are our most honest, our most vulnerable, trusting that God reaches us there, that our prayers are heard, that hope is coming, even if we don't know it yet, or the form that it will take. Sometimes it takes a while for those burdens to transform. And that's okay. You have people who will travel with you no matter how long it takes. And so I invite you to participate in a ritual of honesty and of letting go. In his book, No Bad Parts, psychotherapist Richard Schwartz talks about the act of unburdening, those things that we carry, that we maybe have carried for a really long time, that inform how we move through the world, often in a subconscious space, to be able to take that burden and lay it down. And when he works with his clients, he invites them to give it up in the way that makes the most sense to them. That can be to fire, to water, to earth, or to have someone else hold it for them. And so you are invited. We have fire and flash paper to write whatever it is that you want to release on the flash paper and give it to fire. In a similar way, you can give it to the water, washable markers on coffee filters, so that it will float away into the water. I have a basket full of dirt. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for something to decompose, to fully be transformed into something where nourishment can be found. And so you can bury something that you need to let go in the dirt, trusting that the earth will transform it. Finally, a box given to me by my former partner, but that I treasure immensely. It says, hold each other gently. And isn't that what we're all just looking for? And so if you need the power of this community to hold something gently for you, it can live in this box for as long as you need it to. We are not left without resources should we choose to seek them out. The Psalms of Lament, the ones that, at least for me, make me feel the most seen, the most heard in Scripture, the ones that are messy and raw, and the ones that still breathe hope, still have a sense of possibility in them. They are there. We've just edited them out. And so it's a choice. Then, what do we put back in our hands after we've laid our burdens down? Sarah has made incredibly beautiful prayer beads that move as you pray or work as a fidget, that are imbued with her deep love for her community. And so you are invited, after you release whatever burden you need to release today, to choose a set of prayer beads. They're all unique, they're all different, just like you and your faith are all unique and different, and it doesn't make the grief go away. But it is a physical reminder that you are not alone in it, that God is present with you, and that the love of this community travels with you as well. And so I invite you to participate, however you want to release, and whatever it is that you'd like to hold. You are invited. Thank you all for your bravery to get in touch with that part of yourself that is hurt and feels burdened, the part that it's difficult to acknowledge, even to ourselves, but especially to other people, and maybe even, depending on the way our faith is formulated, even to God. It's hard to be honest. So I'm grateful for the ways that you showed up for yourselves and bore witness to each other. So may this tangible reminder, the prayer beads, and dear ones online, if you'd like them, they're coming for you. They'll be in the mail. Blessed by this community, by our vulnerability, made sacred by our tears. Thank you for giving yourself permission, for giving each other permission to be a little bit more real than we were when we walked in this morning. Gratitude to each of you.